How to save money on your first planted fish tank. Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to share 5 ways to save some serious money on your first planted fish tank. You may already know that fish tanks are an extremely expensive hobby. A fish tank costs, when you initially set it up, at least $200 to $300, and I'm talking about freshwater fish tanks, not saltwater tanks here. And the reason why fish tanks cost that much is that you need a lot of technical equipment, such as light, you need a filter, you need a heater, you need the tank itself, but you also need an aquarium lid, and many more things that are just very expensive when you buy them for the first time. And today I want to take a few minutes and share with you 5 ways to save money. This is perfect if you have never set up a fish tank yet, or if you're looking to set up a new tank and are just looking for some ways to save money. And the first way that I use to save money is to get used stuff. That means that you get the technical equipment that you need for your aquarium, and instead of buying it from Amazon or from the pet store new, you can just get it from eBay, from Craigslist, or maybe even from Facebook groups or other social media groups where people just give away their used stuff for free. And this is quite often the case actually. There are some things that I would get used and other things that I would never get used. For instance, the light, I would definitely check this first, but this is something that is very expensive. A good aquarium light can cost anywhere upwards of $100. This is something that you can easily get used. You should check the functionality first. Then the filter, you can get a used filter, but you should definitely check first whether it's working and whether it's been cleaned. What I probably would not suggest to get used is the fish tank itself. Fish tanks often have small scratches, small also holes in them, and if you get a used tank and check for leakage and then you have a hole, this can cause tremendous costs afterwards. So this is something where I wouldn't save costs. And if you check fish tanks online, just the glass tank of a fish tank is really cheap, relatively speaking. I wouldn't recommend to get a used heater for your aquarium. Heaters are first of all quite cheap, and it's easy to use them in a wrong way. And what I mean by that is, if you don't put them in far enough, they stick out on the top, they can break easily, and you don't necessarily see this right when you put it in. And sometimes there can be rust that comes from heaters, and you should prevent that at any cost. And since it's like 15 to 30 bucks, it's not the biggest cost in your aquarium. The second way to save money, and this is really quite expensive if you buy it in the pet store, is the substrate. I would not recommend to buy dedicated aquarium substrate for mainly the reason that it's extremely expensive, and it's just exactly the same as if you buy non-dedicated aquarium substrate. And what I mean by that is, if you just buy, for instance, normal sand, like for instance pool filter sand or play sand, or you can also even get sand from a local beach, it's no problem at all with that, if you're allowed to do that. It's the exact same sand as the quote-unquote dedicated aquarium sand that you would buy in a pet store, but it's way cheaper. And for the base layer, for the nutrient-rich substrate, you could use something like aqua soil, for instance. There's nothing wrong with that, but again, it's quite expensive. And what I do instead is I just use pond soil or gardening soil instead. You shouldn't use too much because it's really very nutrient dense and will lead to really fast plant growth. But if you use it in a way that you have maybe 1 inch of pond soil or gardening soil, and then top it off with 2 to 3 inches of normal sand, you have a substrate for maybe, if you have a 60-gallon tank, which is relatively big, for maybe $10 to $20, which is very cheap. And what I would recommend as a pro tip when it comes to substrate is to keep some of your substrate as a leftover and store it somewhere. So just for instance the sand that you got, because sand always has a specific kind of color and texture, and if you clean your tank, like after half a year for instance, you can replenish it with some of the new substrate that you saved, or some of the new sand that you saved, and then your tank looks amazing and new again. And this is quite a nice thing that I do from time to time. Next way to save some money is Hardscape. You can also, just like with the technical equipment, buy Hardscape that is used from Craigslist or eBay, or get it from shore from a local river. And this is something that I actually would recommend you to do. You should probably avoid rocks or roots or whatever, pieces of woods, from areas where pesticides are sprayed. So anywhere where there's a huge intensive agriculture, you probably shouldn't get rocks from. But if you are at a local river where the local water quality is okay, it's very safe to get rocks and roots from the river. I would recommend to rinse the rocks or the roots before adding them to your tank, but don't clean it with any cleaning agent or sponge or something. I think that would be overkill, because you actually want some of the beneficial bacteria from the local river system to be in your fish tank. And another benefit of that is that it increases your water quality and that's some beneficial bacteria. You could also have pathogens and hitchhikers on it, such as pest snails. For instance, bladder snails are very common in my area where I live here in Europe, but also you could have carnivorous insects like dragonfly nymphs, for instance. And those are carnivorous, that means they eat meat or even fish. This is something that you should definitely get rid of before adding them. But I always think that it's way too cautious if you think that you get dangerous bacteria or viruses in your tank, because I mean, your fish also have an immune system and they really benefit from beneficial bacteria, and you need bacteria in your tank to work in the filter. I think this is a huge advantage of actually adding just stuff from ashore. My fourth tip to save money on your first planted tank is to get plants from local hobbyists. This is something that I did last year, for instance, with one of my subscribers, Adrian. A huge shout out here to Adrian, where we just met and exchanged plants. And plants are usually extremely expensive and often shipped from other regions, or here in Europe, even from other countries. And what that means is that the plants probably grew up in water that had different parameters, or maybe didn't even grow up in water because they were grown in a greenhouse, because you can do this with many or even most stem plants and they just grow way faster. If you then add them to your specific aquarium with your water quality in your local area, this often leads to the plants dying instantly and melting, what you could say. They just sort of seem to melt away, and this is something that you can prevent and save all of the money that you would pay for new plants by just getting plants from local hobbyists. This ideally could be a friend that also has an aquarium, a planted tank, or just someone from Reddit or from Facebook forums. Because, you know, if you have a planted tank and it's set up in a way that it has a rich nutrient layer, plants usually grow extremely fast, especially stem plants. And at the beginning, in like the first 2 or 3 months, aquarists usually grow and replant their plants or the stems until the tank is filled. And then you don't have anywhere to put your plants anymore. And then you just throw them away. So it's actually better to just give them to another aquarist, and I would definitely do that. So if you are from the Heilbronn or Karlsruhe area and need some plants here in Germany, please reach out. I'm more than happy to give them to you for free. And this is also something that you can do in your area for sure. Now, tip number 5 is to get beginner-friendly and hardy fish species, especially if you're a first-time aquarist. And my number 1 suggestion here is to get a guppy fish, or to get a group of guppy fish. They tolerate a wide range of hardness, pH levels, and water temperatures, and they will produce like crazy. And this is also something that makes the hobby more interesting, because you can see different generations of fish, some of the colors and shapes from the parental generation and the new guppy generation, but also different ones. And this is what makes it extremely interesting. Also, and this is probably tip number 6, but it's in the same area, I would recommend to check your local tap water. And you don't need any chemical test for that, you can just Google it. What are the pH and the hardness of your local tap water? So for instance, if you live in New York City, your pH of your tap water is typically 7.2, and you have soft to moderately hard water. This can be easily found out through Google research. And this would be the ideal water parameters for guppy fish, for instance. Now, if you decide to get discus fish instead of guppy fish and just add them to the tap water after letting it cycle for some time, the discus fish would probably die, or at least suffer and be in very bad conditions, because they prefer a pH of 6 to 7, and 7.2 pushes them to their limits. So you could of course test your water with a test kit and check the pH and lower it with chemicals, but I would not recommend to do this because, first of all, you create then more costs for you, but even more importantly, the fish suffer and then probably die, and then you also have to buy new fish, and this also costs a lot of money. So this is something that I could recommend. So sometimes, even if you have really challenging or hard to keep fish species, you could get them if your local water parameters are really suitable for them anyways, and this depends really on where you live in the world. So these are my 5 or rather 6 tips for saving some serious money on your first aquarium or on your next aquarium. If you like the video, I would appreciate a like and subscribe to my channel. If you are interested in how I added Otocinclus catfish, which are great algae eaters and look like tiny sharks, click on the video on the right hand side here. Or if you want to see my most recent video, click on the video on the left hand side.